I want to tell you a story about the great Disciples of Christ minister, Dr. Fred Craddock, someone who I greatly admire. He tells of a time when he took a rather interesting road trip. I want to tell you his story. He says, I recall some years ago being asked to go some distance to a meeting, and a fellow who was going to the same meeting, who lived near me, said, "Do you want to ride?" I said, "Yeah," saving on gasoline and tear and wear. He said, "I'll stop by for you." When he came by, in the back seat were his wife, whom I had not met, and a daughter. She just graduated from college, a very attractive young woman. They were already in the back seat and said, "Sit up there and y'all can talk." And I said, "All right." They said, "We're not going to the meeting, we're just going shopping." So we started out on this 200-mile trip. We'd gotten about 25 miles, and his wife, sitting directly behind him, said, "You're going too slow." So he sped up. Then she said, "You're going to kill us all." And he slowed down. She said, "We'll never get there." "Are you going to pass here?" He didn't pass. She said, "Why are you waiting in line?" He started to pass around when she said, "You're going to pass all these cars?" So he got back in line. She said, "Don't you see the yellow line? We're in the wrong lane. Pick, 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 pick." Now pretty soon the daughter joined in. Some of you sound like you've experienced something like that. And so this man is sitting there in silence. And Dr. Craddock says, "I was all embarrassed. I mean, what do? You don't want to be there. You'd rather be walking. So what do? I just sat there stewing," he says. "I said to myself, if this fellow were a man, if he really were a man, he'd pull his car over and leave a couple. And then he and I'd go on to our meeting." Well, the farther we traveled, the more I began to say to myself, now, if this fellow were a man, because I couldn't take it. Couldn't take it. Now, when we got there, the wife and the daughter, they went shopping as planned. And in the end, I had a few minutes, and he said, "You want some coffee?" I said, "Fine." We went into a little place, and we sat there staring at the coffee. What do you say? How do you start a conversation? I knew, and he knew I knew. What do? I was just staring at my coffee like it were really interesting coffee. Finally, he said, "Fred, you teach in seminary?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I mean, you're into religion and all that." I said, Yeah. "I mean, you know the Bible and Christianity." "Yeah, what are you talking about?" And he said, "I was just wondering, in your studies and your opinion, what hope do you think there is for a man who has everything in life at age 50? Everything in life he wants, except the one thing he wants the most? Everything in life he wants, except for the one thing that he wants the most. What is it? What is it that we want more than anything else? Is it respect, peace of mind, happiness, satisfaction, lots of money, recognition? I mean, are we sure we really know what we want? Are we sure that what we think we want is what we truly, deeply yearn for? Now, many of us come to church to be reminded about what's most important, or at least to have a place where we can come to try to figure it out. So you'd think that here we'd have an answer to this question, wouldn't you? Or at least a path upon which we could guide people in their effort to realize the answer. But does the church really know? Does the church really know how to lead us to where we want to go? Some of the things that people are looking for when they go to church today are peace of mind in a troubling world. Absolutely. For a place where they can feel comfortable and comforted. Seems important. They often want to look for people who are like them. I think of my colleague, Tony Larson from Racine, Wisconsin, who remembers years ago when the Catholic Church added the kiss of peace to the Mass. That's the part of the service where you're told to turn to your neighbor and shake hands and say, "May the peace of Christ be with you." Now, Tony says, at one Mass I attended, someone turned to me and said, "May the unrest of Christ be with you." And it struck me then, he says, that most of what Jesus talked about when he was alive was not very comforting. It was more unrestful than peaceful. Tony continues, "I have since come to see that it would be just as appropriate to say, 'May the unrest of Buddha be with you,' or the unrest of Susan B. Anthony, or Sojourner Truth, or the unrest of the Jewish prophets." He concluded it doesn't matter so much who your saviors and models for life are. What does matter is that you have some of their unrest. Now let's be honest. It's risky in this consumer culture of ours where people go church shopping to find the right church for themselves and their family to be peddlers of spiritual unrest. Shoppers like to leave feeling satisfied. Right? But Reverend Julianne Silberman reminds us that here in the church, we're not in the satisfaction business. If satisfaction is what we're looking for, then we should go to a place like a day spa. Right? Where satisfaction is their business. So we have to ask ourselves and remind each other occasionally, what is our business? What is our business? I agree with Mike Durrell, an author who's in his upcoming book, describes the church as being in the business of creating spiritually mature people. That's to say, people who live and embody qualities like courage and generosity and compassion. People who understand the value of sacrifice. People who have the tools to forgive and the capacity to love. So in this time of competing ideas of the nature of the church, in this time of ever more elaborate church growth strategies and marketing plans, it is in this time more than ever that we need to remember the central purpose of the church. And as this active and thriving congregation knows quite well that creating spiritually mature people does not come just from passing the peace, or offering services and sermons that serve to satisfy some simplistic sense of spiritual satisfaction or emotional uplift. The people who come to this church have always come for depth and always come for a commitment to something much bigger than themselves. And that's why this church has risen to become the largest of its kind among our denomination. Here at All Souls, we're not afraid of the church's prophetic call upon our lives. And we're not afraid to bear our part in that call. But let's be honest, fear would be an appropriate posture. Because this life, if we're awake, can be quite fierce